When I bought the house at the end of Sycamore Ridge, I didn't care about the square footage or the vaulted ceilings. I bought it for the backyard, specifically the pool. A sleek, saltwater marvel framed with palms and sun-bleached stone, tucked behind privacy hedges and a 10-foot wall. It wasn't just a pool. It was peace. And then Karen moved in 2 doors down. She arrived like a summer storm, loud, unexpected, and with too many rules. Within 3 months, she'd become president of the HOA, a position she wore like a badge and wielded like a weapon. Clipboard in hand, she patrolled the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom. She cited homeowners for mailboxes that were too whimsical, flowers that clashed with community aesthetics, and garden gnomes that were objectively tacky. Still, I'd kept my distance. I paid my dues, kept my grass at regulation height, and didn't make waves. Until the day she made one. It was a Friday afternoon when I pulled into my driveway and noticed the sound: hammers, drills, laughter. It was coming from my backyard. Confused, I unlocked the gate, stepped through, and froze. A construction crew I didn't recognize was laying plywood panels across my pool. Tables were stacked nearby, along with string lights, folding chairs, and speakers. "What the hell is this?" I barked. A young guy with a drill shrugged. "Spring fling setup." "Who authorized this?" I demanded. "I did," came a voice behind me, sweet and sour like overripe lemonade. Karen stood there, dressed like a Pinterest board. Wide-brimmed sun hat, floral blouse, chunky necklace, clipboard clutched to her chest like scripture. "We needed a venue," she said brightly. "And your pool area is perfect. Very resort-like." I stared at her. "You didn't ask." "Oh, it was in the last meeting notes," she replied, brushing past me like I wasn't even there. "The board voted. Unanimous. Page 37 of the bylaws allows temporary use of member properties for HOA-sponsored events." "My pool is not a community center," I said, voice rising. Karen smiled, a thin, patient thing. "Actually, there's a 2-foot easement along your fence line that technically qualifies this area for community use. We looked into it. It's all legal." She stepped onto the plywood like a queen testing the planks of her ship. "It'll be back to normal by Sunday. You won't even notice." "You've got to be kidding me." "I know," she said with a sigh. "We're all making sacrifices." I had to move my wine tasting to the tennis courts. I clenched my jaw, surveying the mess. A string of lights had already been hooked between my palm trees. Someone had set a catering table over my deck chairs. "You had no right," I said. Karen's eyes sparkled. "Oh, I have every right. You should read the bylaws." That night I did. I sat at my kitchen table, flipping through the thick HOA packet I'd ignored since moving in. Page 37. Temporary use clauses. Easement language. Loopholes, so wide you could drive a truck through them. Karen hadn't just found a way in, she'd engineered it. Scheduled meetings when no one could attend, buried notices in spammy emails, outmaneuvered everyone with cheerful manipulation and selective interpretation. My sanctuary was compromised. And worse, she expected me to stand there and smile while she threw a neighborhood gala over it. I could have filed a complaint, written a stern letter, maybe even hired a lawyer. But that's not how this was going to go. See, Karen wasn't just playing politics. She was declaring war. And I wasn't going to be her casualty. I walked back to the pool, standing at the edge of the plywood. I could still hear the water sloshing beneath, trapped like I was. That's when the idea came. Because Karen didn't know everything. She didn't know about the wave machine. Installed just last summer, it was top of the line, designed to simulate surfing currents for private training. It could turn a still pool into an ocean in seconds. And with a little rewiring, I could activate it without anyone knowing. I looked out at the plywood, the string lights, the sound system waiting to be plugged in. She thought she'd claimed my backyard for her party. But I was about to turn her dance floor into a disaster. And I couldn't wait. Saturday arrived with the fanfare of a small-town parade. Trucks rolled in at dawn, unloading crates of champagne flutes, pastel tablecloths, and a portable DJ booth. By midday, my backyard, The one I'd carefully landscaped, financed, and maintained looked like a pop-up wedding venue straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Karen orchestrated it all like a maestro. She wore a lavender dress that matched the event's color scheme, a headset for hands-free barking of orders, and a laminated checklist that seemed to grow by the minute. "Garland goes there, not across the gate," she snapped at a volunteer. "And make sure no one touches the buffet tables until I do the opening toast." From my kitchen window, I watched with a bitter mix of awe and contempt. She'd turned my private retreat into her stage, without permission, without apology. I kept to myself all day, but every so often I noticed neighbors stealing glances toward the house. Some wore sheepish expressions. Others waved half-heartedly, unsure whose side to stand on. Most, I knew, had no idea the party space was commandeered. Karen spun it as a generous loan from a community-minded homeowner. By 6, guests started to arrive. Lawn chairs and kids in tow, dressed in pastels and khakis, they filtered in like bees to a sugar spill. The plywood creaked under heels and loafers, transformed into a dance floor with just enough bounce to make it fun, until it wouldn't be. Karen worked the crowd like a politician, doling out hugs, backpats, and compliments laced with subtle corrections. "Love your dress, Janine. Next time, let's coordinate themes ahead of time." I stepped outside only when the sun dipped low and the garden lights flickered on. The crowd parted slightly as I approached, some whispering, others offering stiff smiles. Karen spotted me instantly and made a beeline. "There he is," she announced into the mic. "Let's give a warm round of applause to our host tonight, who so graciously opened his backyard to us." Polite claps followed, hollow and uncomfortable. I said nothing. Karen leaned in, lowering the mic, smile. "You're playing the part beautifully." I didn't respond. Instead, I scanned the setup, the carefully placed speakers, the delicate centerpieces on the buffet tables, the DJ obliviously queuing up the next song. My hand slid into my pocket, brushing the smooth curve of the remote. The wave machine had 3 modes: ripple, surf, and tsunami. I'd already programmed it for the second. Enough to ruin a plywood platform without risking real harm. The DJ dropped a beat. The dance floor came alive. Couples twirled, kids bounced, and someone attempted a line dance. Karen stood center stage, mic in hand, glass raised high. "Before we really get the party started," she said, her voice syrupy and loud, "I just want to say how proud I am of our little community. We've come so far under strong leadership and cooperation." I watched her. "Leadership is about making hard decisions," she continued, looking straight at me. "Sometimes even unpopular ones. But when the result is unity, well, I think it speaks for itself." She lifted her glass higher. "To community." "Community," the crowd echoed. I pressed the button. The pool beneath them groaned. It began subtly, just a low mechanical hum that blended with the music. Then the water surged. Not all at once, but like a beast stirring beneath the surface. The plywood panels trembled. One edge lifted and slammed down again. A table of plastic cups toppled. Screams cut through the laughter. Then the dance floor buckled. A long crack split down the center, releasing a burst of water that sprayed the front row of dancers. A second later, the middle section collapsed entirely, dragging chairs and a half-decorated arch into the churning waves below. Chaos erupted. Guests stumbled over one another trying to escape. Food splashed into the water. The DJ yanked cords from his system, sparks flying. Someone slipped and fell face-first into the punch bowl. And then Karen. She teetered on the edge of a cracked panel, arms flailing as the platform tilted beneath her. With a final, graceful slip, she plunged into the pool. Gasps. A single laugh. Then another. She resurfaced, sputtering, soaked to the bone, her lavender dress clinging like wet tissue, headset crackling as she ripped it off. I clicked the remote again. The machine shut down. Silence fell, broken only by the lapping of waves against plywood and the distant wail of a ruined saxophone solo. Karen stared at me, breathless and trembling. You did this," she hissed. I gave a slight shrug. "Next time, I said, ask. And I walked back into the house, leaving a trail of stunned stares in my wake. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next day was a study in awkward silence. The pool, what was left of it, was a waterlogged disaster, littered with broken chairs, half-ruined centerpieces, and the debris of Karen's spring fling. By noon, the partygoers had long since fled, and all that remained was the sound of the humdrum cleanup crew dragging soggy furniture across the yard. As I sat inside, nursing a cup of coffee, the phone calls began. First came the HOA board members. It was one of the newer ones, a timid voice, barely audible above the background noise of a busy office. Mr. Turner, the voice said. There's been a bit of a situation. We've received multiple complaints about the, incident with the pool. Could you please explain? I didn't do anything, I interrupted, cutting him off. Your president did, though. You'll find her floundering in the pool. There was a pause, followed by a nervous cough. Mr. Turner, I think we should discuss this in a more formal setting. Could you, come by the next board meeting? I'm not sure it's worth the meeting, I replied, then set my coffee down with deliberate force. But feel free to tell Karen to stop hosting private events on my property. The line went quiet. He didn't argue. Instead, he mumbled something about looking into it and quickly hung up. I leaned back, satisfied, but the phone wasn't done. This time it was Karen. Her voice was as tight as a drum when she spoke, each word calculated and sharp. Mr. Turner, she began, the name dripping with disdain. You have no idea what you've just done. You have no idea what you've just done, I countered. You're lucky I didn't let that pool go full tsunami. But maybe next time, you'll ask before you throw a circus in my backyard. I will not be treated like this. You'll pay for this. All of it. And I'll make sure of it. She hung up before I could reply. I didn't need to hear the threats. There were always threats with Karen, always grandiose promises of retribution, of enforcing her control, of making people like me pay for their defiance. But for the first time, I was the one standing with the power. And I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. The HOA board meeting that week felt like a powder keg. By the time I arrived, a quiet buzz filled the room. Neighbors lined the walls, sitting in tight clusters, murmuring to one another. Karen, with her icy composure, stood at the front, clipboard in hand, like she was giving the State of the Union address. Her eyes narrowed when she spotted me, but she held her tongue. I sat at the back, arms folded, waiting. Karen began her speech about the success of the spring fling, calling it a resounding triumph for the neighborhood. She detailed how it brought everyone together, though the only thing that seemed united was a sense of dread hanging in the air. She paused, and the room fell quiet. And now, of course, she said with a thin smile, we must address the unfortunate incident with Mr. Turner's pool. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable under her gaze. She might have had the microphone, but I had the attention of the room. And I wasn't about to let her paint me as the villain in this mess. I'd like to correct a few things, I said, standing up. My voice carried across the room, firm and clear. The incident you're referring to wasn't caused by any unfortunate mistake. It was the result of a deliberate overstep. I turned toward Karen, who was visibly seething. It wasn't Karen's spring fling. It was her blatant disregard for my property and the rights of the homeowner. She threw a party on my land without permission. And then, when I asked her to stop, she threatened me. The room was silent now. Karen's grip on her clipboard tightened, her knuckles white. But she didn't speak. I'm done being intimidated, I continued, my eyes locking on hers. I'm done letting her pull the strings because of some obscure bylaw she twisted into her favor. I looked around the room, watching the reactions of the neighbors. Some looked uneasy, others outright uncomfortable. But I'm not here to make enemies, I added, turning back to the board. I'm here to make it clear that this ends. Today. There was a beat of silence, then the board members looked at each other. No one seemed eager to speak up, except one man, a middle-aged guy who had lived in the neighborhood for years, his face flushed with nervous energy. I think, I think we need to revisit the bylaws, he said, his voice tentative but gaining strength. We can't just let one person dictate everything, especially if it's causing division in the neighborhood. The murmurs grew louder, voices building in agreement. I saw Karen's face flush with fury as she stood, ready to protest. But the tide had already shifted. The board hesitated, clearly unsure of how to proceed, but the momentum was on my side now. The meeting stretched on for what felt like hours, but by the end, it was clear. Karen's grip on the HOA was weakening, and it was only a matter of time before her empire of rules and restrictions started to crumble. But that wasn't the end. Not yet. I had one final card to play, and this was a game Karen hadn't yet learned how to lose. The following week, the HOA board met again, but this time, it was under my terms. The pressure was mounting for Karen, the cracks in her carefully constructed facade of power becoming wider with each passing day. She no longer had the unwavering support of the board, and whispers of her overreach had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Karen was desperate, but she was about to learn that desperation often leads to mistakes. I stood at the back of the room, arms folded, watching as Karen took her place at the front, her usual air of smug superiority replaced with thinly veiled frustration. She tried to maintain her composure, but it was clear to anyone who had been paying attention that she was losing her grip. Today wasn't about the pool. Today was about the future. She started with a weak attempt to reframe the party as a community bonding event gone awry, focusing on the damage to the boardwalk and trying to shift blame to unforeseen mechanical failures. But the board members weren't buying it. More importantly, the neighborhood wasn't buying it. The facade was crumbling. I waited, letting her speak, giving her just enough rope to hang herself. When the moment came, I stood and made my move. I've been sitting here, listening to this nonsense long enough, I said, cutting through the murmur of quiet conversation. The room fell silent. Karen shot me a glare, her eyes blazing with barely contained fury. I'm done with this, I continued, my voice steady, the words sharp. You've used your position to bully this neighborhood into submission. You've manipulated rules and ignored common decency to get your way. But no longer. The game is over. I let that last sentence sit in the air. Karen's face twisted, her jaw tight as she stepped forward, trying to regain control. You have no right to. I raised my hand, cutting her off before she could finish. Actually, Karen, I do. The bylaws state that a majority vote is required for any changes to be made. You've made it clear that you only care about your own agenda. Well, I've rallied a majority. I turned slowly, my eyes sweeping across the room. This neighborhood is tired of your antics. They're tired of living under your thumb. It's time for a change. I knew the tension was thick, but I pressed on. And while you've been busy pretending to be the queen of this HOA, I've been quietly organizing. I've spoken to the neighbors, all of them, the ones who feel silenced, the ones who've been too scared to speak up. They're ready for a new direction, Karen. A direction where people aren't manipulated or bullied. The board members were looking at each other now, murmuring, considering. The shift was palpable. Karen looked like she might explode. She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, a voice from the back interrupted. I second what Mr. Turner says, said the neighbor who had spoken up before. I've been here longer than most of you, and I've never seen a leader so self-serving. Karen's had her time. It's time for us to move forward. Another neighbor stood. I agree. The neighborhood isn't a playground for Karen's personal vendettas. We need someone who will actually listen. A few more stood up, nodding in agreement. The votes were adding up faster than I'd anticipated, but the resistance was building momentum. Karen's face was turning crimson, her mouth open and closing in disbelief as she watched her support crumble. Then, with a resigned sigh, Karen sat down. Her eyes were blazing, but the words to defend herself had vanished. For the first time since I'd moved in, the room was united against her. She was done. The board turned to me, nodding solemnly. Mr. Turner, the head of the board said, his voice steady but reluctant, you've made a compelling case. We will reconvene to finalize a new direction for the HOA. The motion was passed quickly. There would be changes to the way the board operated, and Karen was officially removed from her position of authority. The room felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from the shoulders of everyone present. Karen didn't speak again. She stood, her movements stiff, her pride fractured, and left without a word. The crowd that had gathered outside murmured in quiet disbelief, but there was a shared sense of victory in the air. I stood there for a moment, letting the finality of it all wash over me. It had been a long, frustrating battle, but I had come out victorious. The neighborhood would no longer be under the thumb of one woman's reign of power. As I turned to leave, a few of my neighbors approached me, offering quiet congratulations. "You did good," one of them said. "You stood up for us all." I smiled, shaking his hand. It wasn't just me. It was everyone who was tired of Karen's nonsense. This neighborhood is stronger than she ever realized. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. I felt a sense of calm settle over me as I walked back to my house. The battle had been won, but the war wasn't over. There were still others like Karen out there, but now I knew that when the time came, I wouldn't have to fight alone. For the first time in a long time, I was at peace.